start recording now. So hello everybody, again, thanks for making the time to basically discuss biology of cancer, from genomics to clinics. How can we improve it, or basically how can we solve it? So we have quite a high guest today, Ms. Professor Oya Beyan. Maybe could you give us a short rundown? What are your current research interests?
Yeah, my name is Oya Beyan. I am the director of Medical Informatics Institute at University of Cologne, and I'm also leading a data integration center there. Our current research interest is like two-sided. One is reusing the data for the research purposes, improving the reusability of the data for integrated analysis, and also like analyzing this data with machine learning and AI in the distributed settings. We are closely collaborating with national and international parties, and we are a part of many different networks for different use cases. And I will be happy to give some information about them either today or later. If anyone interested, please feel free to contact.
Absolutely. I will put all the contact information in the description box. Then maybe Julia, can you also give a short introduction for you?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Julia Germann, and I'm a computer science master student at RWTH Aachen University. I'm also employed at Oya's department in Cologne. And so I found my way into the biological and medical field in my bachelor studies. There I already started working at the Institute for Computational Genomics at Uniklinik Aachen. And I mainly worked with genomic data there, and now I changed more to medical data and more to clinical data when I joined Oya's group.
Perfect, thank you. Sidzo, maybe you can also give a short introduction into you.
Yes, I am Sigrid Perez. I am a master student at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And I am officially a biologist by training, but I have also moved more into the computer science fields and artificial intelligence. And I am currently using computer vision to analyze microscopy data.
Perfect. So I'm curious, what is the current state of the usage of AI in the clinic? Do like a lot of methods get implemented in the clinic already, or is it still a nascent field that it's not really, people want to employ it but don't know how? What's the current state of it? Maybe whoever wants to comment first.
Maybe I can start with that question. So when you are talking about bringing AI machine learning to clinics, it's a very challenging topic. The reason is that mostly when we are training our algorithms, there are several aspects. First, let's talk about the accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity of these machine learning models. When you are training your models, you mostly depend on certain data sets. And each data set has their own biases. It's first of all, it's collected in a certain environment, and if it's image with a certain machine, and then like you optimize your algorithm on that single data set. When you are transferring this to another settings with another type of data, you always have problems. But the biggest problem is to not understand the amount of the bias. So the reproducibility of these AI algorithms are extremely important for the clinicians. Saying that my algorithm has this accuracy is not really enough, and you should have methods to test with different data and show how it performs in different settings. Of course, we have other problems, legal and ethical issues too. Even when you are using when you are adapting drugs into clinic, you have approximately 17 years of time between the first drug and usage in the clinic. It's very long time. And also for AI, we don't have enough legal support how to transfer this AI product to clinics, who will be responsible when a decision has been taken. So it's a kind of multiple sided problem, but as an informaticians, I think like our main responsibility is to make this algorithms reproducible as much as possible. It's the key aspect to transfer to clinics. Currently, like you won't see lots of AI algorithms in clinics. Mostly like they're embedded with imaging or machines. So like it's part of the another product, but it's very difficult to transfer standalone applications to the clinics. But don't be very pessimistic. Like last time when I checked, I don't know if you know FDA, like this is a approval of drugs at the United States. They had over 25 AI applications they already approved for the clinics. That's the amount for the whole world, I suppose.
That's really surprising. I wouldn't have guessed that it's so much already. Then I'm curious, how can we better transfer the models and make it more reproducible? Will explainable AI have any application in there? So also to basically enhance confidence of the doctors and regulators to better catch, let's say, obvious pitfalls of these systems?
So maybe I can comment on this. So explainability will definitely play a big role in the future, I think. But current reviews more suggest that if you train a machine learning model on clinical data, then you should always only use this as some kind of suggestion, so that the output of the model is not used as a diagnosis or as a result, but only as a suggestion to the medical doctor, so that he can have a more founded decision on his own. But not, as I've said, to directly use the output, because this whole research of explainable AI is still not that far developed that we can just trust explainable AI approaches to decide about life and death.
That's probably a very reasonable statement to do at the moment. And maybe to cycle back to Professor Beyan, one of your main research is the fair use of it. How can we ensure privacy when clinical data or patient data is used?
So it's one of the biggest challenges with the clinical and patient data. We need more data to make algorithms more reliable, more reproducible, reusable. But also we have lots of privacy issues, so we cannot really exchange the medical data. There are several methods of doing that. Like first, you can have your close consortiums. Like in Germany, we have like different consortia creating certain data sets within this consortia and exchanging it with certain agreements after anonymizing it. But a novel approach might be like, if you cannot really exchange the data, you can exchange algorithms. So rather than sending data to another party to analyze that, you can send your algorithms. Your algorithms can learn from different resources with different data sources. And the tricky point, they won't transfer the data, they will just update the models. And in this way, they will overcome these privacy issues. There are a few approaches around that. One is, I don't know if you know that it's the data shield approach. It's only valid for the structured data. So you have an infrastructure with the structured data sets, and you have your R code working on this distributed databases. But like you cannot really use for the image data. What we are developing something called like personal health train. It's a joint effort between Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland. Like these are the current developers for the personal health train. And what we developed is like a trusted way of sending algorithms and training that on the local data sets. Currently, like we are using this approach in Germany in 5 different projects, including medical informatics initiative projects, research data infrastructures, and Gaia-X. And we see this as a future perspective. I think as we develop those secure methods to analyze data without sharing it, there will be more and more applications developed by using this infrastructure.
That's extremely interesting. Maybe to include seats a little bit, you probably don't have to deal with privacy that much. What do you see the status quo in AI systems in your area?
Well, in my area, so in more of cell biology, there are oftentimes a lot smaller data sets where like deep learning is a lot more difficult because you simply lack the amount of data to train very complex systems properly. But luckily, you don't have to worry about privacy of yeast cells or whatever. So you can easily exchange data sets. But also what I was curious about for Professor Beyan, so when you transfer an algorithm without transferring the data, the first thing that came to my mind is that do you have the problem of catastrophic forgetting, that once you train it on a new data set, it forgets everything it learned on the old data set? I would imagine that that might be a problem with the approach you highlighted.
Maybe I can give a short answer that it's based on how you're gonna distribute the learning and how you like if you are doing federated learning, you have these 2 approaches. One is the federated learning, which you send like the same algorithm to multiple sources, and you get this updates, model updates, and then you accumulate at the center. So this is the federated approach. And you also have incremental approach, like your algorithm visits each data center incrementally and learns incrementally. Catastrophic forgetting, of course, is a problem in the second approach. What is important in here, like to understand the underlying data distributions. And how you're gonna design a smart routing and smart model updating methods. It's also valid for federated learning. If you have very different distributions, then you have to consider how you will join those updated weights. So it is a problem, but it's not something that cannot be overcome with the current level of research. But it's something that you have to be careful with. When you are working with data, I think the key point, you should never act as blindly. Either you are doing an analysis with your data set at your own computer or sending methods to different data set. You should always be aware of what is this profile of the data and how it might impact your learning and what you are training your model for. You might have a biased data. It doesn't mean that your algorithm is bad, but if you know your data bias and you can exactly say that my algorithm is good for that type of specific profile, and it's really good enough to say that.
Does it answer your question, Sitze?
Yes, that is a answer that I think that's good. That there are this thought about that the catastrophic forgetting can be overcome with the right approaches.
So what we did actually, not only us, like there are several studies on that. MIT does one study, and we did a few studies, and also in Netherlands, Mayo Clinic and Redeker follows this approach, and they also use on different data set. And our experiences, it almost performs as good as the centralized learning. So when it's available, like we create a test bed, we combine data sets, and we test those incremental and federated learning approaches with different epochs. Of course, the trick is that you don't send it once. Like you have to send it multiple times, and then you have to arrange like in which order you will send and the frequency of this retraining. And if you can tune it in a like with a certain frequency, it performs like very, very close to central approach.
Then I'm curious how healthcare informatics, can it inform insights on the molecular level? And if it could, what do you think could we do to better translate the information and integrate it along the different stages?
Could you repeat that? I wasn't entirely sure what you meant.
So for example, I know that for patient data, like treatment data is like digitized and made available in databases, and can we use basically the outcomes of these treatment files to gain understanding on the base biology, cell biology level of cancer, for example? And if so, is it possible to better translate it, or how to best translate it?
Okay, maybe I can comment on this. So it pretty much, I would say, depends on which data you exactly have, because yeah, a big challenge in clinical data science is that you have not only one database, but a single database for each department in the hospital. So you have treatment data from the radiologists, you have treatment data or analysis results from the radiologists, you have treatment data from the medical doctor who does the treatment, and also even if you only concentrate on cancer patients, you have different treatment opportunities, like possibilities like chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and so you have different databases you have to access, and depending on depending on which data you have, you can also have different conclusions. So if you have tumor markers, for example, which are determined in cancer, you can also analyze which tumor markers on the molecular level act in which way, but they are not available for every cancer patient. So for each cancer patient, different tumor markers are determined, and also for some patients, no marker is determined at all. So it's really difficult to go from this clinical data to the molecular level, I think, because these molecular measurements are often very expensive, and so the clinicians are not able to measure it for all patients. So clinical data and treatment data, yeah, in most cases does not have that high amount of data of molecular markers, and to really gain knowledge about this.
So you'd say data acquisition is like one of the main obstacles. Is there any particular type of data that's like extremely sparse or extremely well available? Where are the bottlenecks, and what do you think are the measurement methods on a track to get cheaper or more widely used, or is it or is there still no light at the end of the tunnel regarding the availability of data or the measurement of cancer data?
Maybe I can comment on that a little bit. So, like as Julia said, if you try to combine multiple data sets, your data gets smaller and smaller because you don't have same for the same patient. The way to, but like when you are dealing with complex cases, you need to integrate this data, and you need to integrate from multiple sources. The way of doing that actually involving more than one clinic. So if you can create networks to share this data, to analyze this data, then that's the light at the end of tunnel. If you look to different types of data, for example, the easiest data set you can find the radiology data, because they have well-established standards, that, like they have MRI machines or X-ray machines producing data at certain standards. So you know what type of data you will get, and they can share it easily. Of course, when it comes to the annotated data, it gets a little bit difficult, because like they might have different annotations too, and they might also have the free annotations, and you might not always export these annotations easily. What is the most difficult data is the clinical data, because unfortunately, when we look at this hospital information systems, they are designed for money. So the main aim of a hospital information system is to record patient, so hospital can get reimbursement from the insurance company. They don't really care about the other details. For example, you have diagnostic codes, because you will get money according to diagnosis, duration of stay, those kind of things. So they are more administrative systems than health records. And recording all this health information is still a burden for clinicians, and they don't do that. And companies are not really willing to share this data, even they have it. Like when you are changing a vendor, or if you are asking for data, vendor says, this is our data. The problem is, like we are discussing now, whose data is that? When you are collecting patient data, who owns the data? Is this the hospital? Is this the company, or patients? And there are different laws around this, and it's really a challenge to say that whose data is that, and who can really give access to others.
Well, I can imagine that the regulatory framework of different countries is a mess. Like I would probably say that if the measurements is taken on my therapy or my body, then it should be my data. But that's probably the hospitals and the companies will disagree on this one.
Yeah, definitely. That's the problem, actually. Like researchers or like advocates saying that, like, if it's patient's data, person owns that. Like if you are producing this data. And now in GDPR, there's right to get your data. Theoretically, you can apply to any hospital, and you can say, I want to have my data. But in practice, they won't be able to extract this data and give it to you.
Okay. That's very sad on the one hand. On the other hand, then I'm curious, what's your opinion on frameworks like the Personal Genome Project? It's a project where people get, for example, their DNA sequence and then just upload it for researchers or everybody to see on different levels of privacy.
Maybe I will also ask audience, like, who didn't use this TCGA genome data? Like when we were all studying or creating thesis, if we cannot access this data, we all use this collected data sets, and they were good efforts. But I think now it's stopped. They are not collected samples anymore. They were good initiatives, and they really gave the opportunity to have data set. But when I was working with them, of course, they were also limited. I remember, like in breast cancer, it was 3 years ago, they had many cases, but if you are working on subtypes, for certain subtypes, you had less than 100 or 200 or like 900 cases. So the distribution was very varying. Yeah, we need to do better than this, I suppose.
Thank you.
if I may, I'd have a follow-up question on that. That might be also interesting for the audience, since most people in the audience at some point will be some kind of patient for something, right? And when we talk about privacy of patient data, I was just wondering, typically to a medical case, I imagine there comes a lot of different data points with it. So it could be, for example, the images of the cell, or the name, the age, the address of the patient on the other side, and multiple different things. So I was wondering, in reality now, if a patient was actually in a hospital and this kind of data was collected, where is sort of the line on which information is solely connected to the patient? For example, the name, obviously. On the other side, the like purely medical data, for example, type of disease, and then image of a cancer cell, for example, which has a scientific purpose or value. Where is the like ethical line which belongs to the scientist and which belongs to the patient?
So I'm not a lawyer and I'm not very familiar with all the GDPR regulations and stuff, but I can comment maybe on the privacy preserving techniques a data scientist would apply. So in the best case, there would be one table or one database for the data scientist uses. And then this data scientist tries to anonymize the data so that the patient data is safe, so that no identification of the individual patient is possible anymore. And so there are approaches, and also a lot of regulations have to be followed to do research with clinical patient data. So you shouldn't be too afraid to have your identity revealed and all your medical details. So in what I started with earlier, if you now have this one database per patient, you can try to adapt the privacy so that you, at first, you would remove the name and the surname, so first name and surname. And the second step, you would try to, so these are identifying items or identifying data fields. You would remove them. And then in a second step, you would try to group people or to group single values such as the age, which are quasi-identifying. So for example, if you know you are a young cancer patient, only 30 years old and already have cancer, and you are in this database and you are the only person who is 30 years old, all other cancer patients are older, then this age would identify you. If you have this additional knowledge that there's only one person of 30 age, which is you. And also against these kind of identifying attacks, there are these grouping approaches that you not say you are 30 years old, but you just say, okay, these are all patients which are younger than 50 years. And these are, for example, approaches which are followed so that you cannot identify patients. And also for each research project, you have to define some kind of ethics Antrag. So it's in German, it's called Ethikantrag. And there you also have to say how you will protect the privacy of the data. And there you also have to specify which privacy protection approaches you will apply. And then in a panel discussion or in some kind of panel, it is decided whether it's sufficient or whether you have to do more.
Great, thank you for the answer. I think it's a very interesting and also, of course, important trade-off between accuracy and privacy. Yeah.
If I may expand on, I think as a bit of a counterpoint, there what comes to mind is one study which is, well, a bit let's just say it's a bit weird that a group of researchers managed to extract patient identities solely on MRI data of the head based on facial recognition. So with a photo, you can have facial recognition algorithms and then reconstruct what the MRI would match with that. And while that is like an edge case, whether that would be really a big problem in real life is the question. But that kind of makes you wonder really how people can push the limits of what anonymized data they can, well, unanonymize.
Yes, I can also add a few things. Like there are different challenges, like with just a few parameters, like 5, I think, with postcode, gender, and these very simple things. You can identify patients from the administrative data sets in the United States. And the problem is, like, I think more finding a balance between, of course, like we don't want to make this data available for hackers to identify people and also create privacy issues. But on the other hand, when you are talking with patients, you won't see any rare disease patients really cares about being identified, and they are really looking for a cure, and they are really want to share this data. We shouldn't put this as a barrier to not to analyze data. Yeah, from my research side, as I said, like I try to solve it from the technology point of view and sending by algorithms, but for also other cases, like there should be a good thumb of rule, like you can go to the extreme and you can really identify any data sets. But if you take that extreme cases, you cannot really advance in research and you will be stuck with a small data set. So that's the reality, I suppose. There's a trade-off.
Yeah, maybe I can add on that because yeah, in the projects which I have been working on so far, it's always the problem that you have to wait very long for data if it's patient data. So as Sigrid has also commented a few moments ago that yeah, yeast is not that that privacy secure yeast data, or yeast doesn't care about data being leaked, but patients do. And so working with patient data always requires you to wait a lot more to get all these privacy issues sorted out and to really think about which privacy preserving approaches have to be applied. So as you've said, if you can identify a patient then from the MRI data, you also have to care about these issues. And this is a really, really important step in medical data science, and it always takes a lot of time. So also this should be thought of when talking about medical AI applications in the future. It will always take time to sort out privacy issues.
Then I'm actually curious, how can we also factor in the upcoming like consumer market for like wearable sensors, all of maybe to make it a little bit more sophisticated, like for diabetes, the online continuous measurement of blood sugar levels, or any future more advanced sensors. I think there is some research about cancer detection in cell-free DNA. So how can we ensure that there will be some level of privacy when basically consumer-facing companies are circumventing the whole ethical discussion and the Ethikrat? Is there okay, no idea. That's gonna be a hard one.
So yeah, I think it's quite hard and difficult one. Like it also depends on the country. Like in United States, I suppose it's not that big issue, and market comes first. Then like you can upload this data into cloud, and you can analyze it, and companies might really have a grab on also your medical data as they do other type of data. Like when you are Googling, actually, when you are using many products, you are already giving that data. And it's a really also political topic, like how companies, at which boundaries they can use or they can transfer this data. And when you are talking about wearable sensors, they are not exactly medical data either. I mean, the amount of you walked or like exercise or those kind of things, what you eat. It's not the medical data, but lifestyle data, and it's less regulated. And it comes up to the patients, and they have the consent from those apps. Actually, they are giving consent to all these companies. So it's tricky.
I mean, on the one hand, I see that at the moment there isn't that much of a problem. I think the sensor industry is like pushing quite hard in the healthcare direction, and also there are, I think, some possibilities to go from lifestyle to basically health data. Do you see where are the boundaries where it stops being useful or quite ethical to analyze the data, the lifestyle data they are getting to basically make informed guesses about the health of their patients?
Maybe I can mention different consent types, like what do we consent, like as a patient or as a person? Traditionally, like patients, when they were enrolling to clinical studies, they were giving their consent to use that data in a specific clinical study. But you cannot really reuse this data for another clinical study. Even if you change the research question, even if they are the same people, you cannot simply use it because it's another question. In last years, maybe for 3-4 years now, there are discussions about dynamic consent. If we can trace our own data, then we can decide dynamically who can use our data. For example, as a researcher, when I have a request, patients can really decide on that. Of course, this approach has their own limitations. First, like we are assuming that all patients are eligible to use those technologies. Those technologies exist, and they will be enthusiastic to check their emails to give consent or revoke their consents. Active patients, active citizens with dynamic consent is one approach. Of course, like you might think that you will be okay to use your, if somebody used your data for research purposes, but what will happen if insurance companies are using your data to reduce the access of certain groups to healthcare benefits? Then probably patients will be very unhappy about that. So I think like for which purpose data has been used is the critical point, and maybe like we can really think about having more active patients deciding on this patient views, but still there's a long way to go.
I'm curious about how we could fill that out. Are there any emerging technologies that basically engage the patient more?
Yes and no. So at United States, I don't know, like probably you are not from informatics domain and you don't know Tim Berners-Lee.
Probably, let's assume that we don't.
Okay, so like he's the founder of the internet. So he
Okay.
found World Wide Web and internet, like that was him. In last a few years, he's working on a technology called a technology for keeping that personal data at the person level with mobile devices. So like it's kind of similar approach with this traveling algorithm. So in his approach, like patient or citizens should own their data, and rather than browsing only websites, like they should have access on this personal data repositories. So it's kind of changing the structuring of internet at the background. Like you don't have HTTP pages, but you have these data sources with certain description around who can access and what is the purpose of the access, and you can configure this access points. So it's an evolving technology. It's called solid approach. There's not many things around it yet. Like you will see the purpose, but still there's no way of announcing it. Also, there are some other approaches called fair digital objects, like every data objects in internet can be described as a digital object, and it can be some metadata around that. Like it's also needs that kind of underlying technology change. It's coming, probably like it will need a few more years, then we will have a different internet. We won't access only information, but we will be interacting with all this data, and there will be some interfaces who can access, who cannot access.
Right. Thank you. That's been a very interesting outlook. So we are talking about various different interfaces of biology and computer science or informatics here. And now we want to revert back a little bit to a more technical question, so to say, about the work that you do. We talked a lot about the AI models and the patient data now, but what we, for an outsider, for example, from my experience at least, the catchphrase AI model and all that's attached to it becomes very intransparent very quickly. And this is why we are wondering, can you give us a little insight on how you actually work to construct these models? So what is the design, build, test cycle, so to say, like for these models? How can you ensure that, for example, when you have, maybe we can start with Sigrid on that one. For example, when you have a set of pictures and you want to identify some state of a cell or some state of a patient, how can you make sure that the actual giveaways for a state or a disease are actually accessed and then rightly classified by such a model?
Yes. Okay. So usually work like AI has become almost synonymous with neural networks, even though it isn't only neural networks, but most of the stuff we do is neural networks. So I'll keep it to that, where like there are different layers of neurons, which are basically, we only have a mathematical value, and they have it's linear transformation. So you basically, every neuron is a weighted sum of the previous neurons, and that goes forward to eventually lead you to an outcome. And all these connections, how much they are weighted, can be trained. And this training occurs by you have like your input data, and you have an output label, for instance, and you check whether it is correct or not, where the error comes from, and then you try to adjust your weights. And that gives you a lot of parameters to tune, especially with these big models, which is why you need a lot of data. But there's also always the problem that you might just be, what they call overfitting, so that you are fitting to like very specific cases, and when you then try to apply it to something broader, it has no predictive power whatsoever. So one of the main methods is to limit how big these weights can be. That's a pretty powerful one, because then your model might perform poorer on the on your training data, but it will have better generalizability. There are also methods of early stopping. So you train your data, you don't keep it going forever, because then eventually it will start recognizing individual pixels of noise. And so you stop before it learns all these tiny insignificant things. There are like multiple things, and one of them also important is dropout, that you so say, like when I'm training this, let's say that 25% or whatever of your weights are basically set to 0. They don't matter anymore. So then the algorithm can never rely on one specific detector thing too much. So for instance, if you have from different data sets, you might have some text in the bottom of your image, for instance, and then it might even learn that, oh, if there's text, it must come from this data set, then it's likely that it is cancer. So and that you do randomly, so that the model can never rely on one signal too much. There are plenty of things, but those are, I think, main important ones. Maybe others want to add something to that.
Yeah, so maybe I can add on the other models, which are not neural nets, because those are the models I've worked with mostly. Neural nets are very powerful, also especially on image data and time series data. There you can also have feedbacks from some neurons to others, so that you can analyze sequential data. So neural networks in general and all their subtypes are very powerful instruments. But there are also more classical methods, which some of you may have heard in some lectures, which are clustering methods, k-nearest neighbors, k-medians, or something like this. Or you can have supervised learning methods like decision trees or logistic regression, which are the basic examples which are covered in each data science lecture. And so those models have the advantage over the neural networks that they, so especially methods like the decision tree method, they have the advantage that they are more explainable than neural networks, because Sietse has outlined that you have these different layers of neurons and you train the weights between these neurons. But in the end, you will always simply have the input, you know the weights, and you know the output. But why are there these weights? Why is there a 0.6? Why is there a 0.3? You cannot explain it. You have this black box and you cannot put explainability in it. And there are approaches who try to overcome this issue. But for example, for this more classical methods, that's also why I have preferred them in projects before, because they are better explainable. You can explain your choices. So in the decision tree algorithm, you end up with then a decision tree, which splits up in different subsets of the training data set in every step. And then you can go down the decision tree and say, see, okay, the training data set has first been split according to whether the patient is a smoker or not. And then in the next step, the non-smokers have been split up in these 3 groups. So you have this tree and you know what it did and how it does the classification. So you can afterwards, as a medical doctor or a domain expert in another field, you can look at these decisions and justify why they work, also on the domain knowledge level. And that's currently still a disadvantage of the neural networks, that they do not provide this possibility to explain every step. But research is also done on that, but that's probably more for the future, not yet.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point. When I'm working with neural nets, then your like the end of your model, it might just be a list of like 1 million or more numbers, and you cannot just look at that list and say, oh, this is what's going on. You just have to hope that your algorithm learned the right thing, and there are plenty of methods to try to test if it generalizes well, but it is very difficult to see what goes inside, what goes on inside of the black box.
And I'm actually curious a little bit about the future. Where do you see AI being applied in areas like drug development, or any or development of any cancer therapies or disease therapies? I'm sorry.
I think like at some point they're already applied. Like depends on how you think about AI. For example, we have tumor boards. Okay, so like even like creating some visualizations, some like clustering algorithms for these tumor boards, and letting experts to discuss on this simple AI products is a step. So like, can AI be independent from the expert? That's question maybe. And first, do we really want that? In some cases, yes, because like you might think you can, for example, for radiology, AI can predict better than an average radiolog. So that's a known fact. And also in many countries, you might not have enough healthcare for dermatology. Like we have still very nice applications, like patients can take pictures of their lesions, and then it can be classified and see if it's malign or benign. And it's of course not good as a clinician, but like if you are in Africa, if you don't have access to healthcare system, it's your best option. Then it's the first entrance to the healthcare system. It doesn't have to be final decision, but I think it's quite realistic to say that AI at a certain level is still part of the healthcare.
Obviously, I think it will also play a bigger role as time goes on. Maybe Sietze also can give like some insights about like the genomic or molecular levels, if there are any pushes to use artificial intelligence to do the actual drug development or do personalized medicine.
Yeah, so I think that drug development and personalized medicine are two ways in which AI will probably have a big impact. So, well, let's start with personalized medicine. It's a big buzzword these days. And so the idea is that with enough data, you can eventually train algorithms to predict how well a patient will respond to a certain drug for their disease based on their specific either genomic profile or all kinds of medical data. And that is kind of considered a holy grail. And there are there are tools. For instance, there was recently the Informer from DeepMind, where they find the regulatory elements in the DNA of humans, and with all this, the more we learn about all this genomic data, the better we might be able to predict how a specific patient will respond to a specific drug based on their specific genomic metabolic profile. And then there is drug development. So also one big one recently from DeepMind was the AlphaFold, which was able to predict how a protein will fold based on the amino acid sequence. And what this allows people to do is to develop drugs more easily so if you know, for instance, a certain receptor that is on a cancer cell that you want to target, you can build a specific protein that might bind to it, or for non-protein protein drugs, there are already synthesis algorithms. And so I think also for COVID-19, there were a lot of these designs, like the spike proteins, for instance, like having AI to help you with predicting how these fold. That's pretty useful, and how they will respond to other drugs. That can really guide you into where you want to go, because before it was kind of hit and miss. You just test a lot of compounds, but the especially with protein folding, the search space is just so massive because it's an exponential problem, so that you will simply need AI to find the optimal solutions, or you can never fully explore all the possibilities. And I think that, well, is something I look forward to. I think that is a very promising development in these days.
Yes, so given the time, if anybody of the guests also have like questions for other part of the guests, now would be the time. Else, I would just ask you to maybe where the audience can find you, and I will put everything from your social media and websites, as well as maybe MOOCs you have. For example, the paper review of AlphaFold we did, you could also find. And yeah, do you have any questions, or do you want to, where can the audience find you? Okay.
Okay, then maybe I can start. I didn't know who wants to start. Yeah, so I can be reached via email. I will, I think you know it, and you can put it there, and also on LinkedIn if you wish to.
Perfect.
I prefer emails.
I can also be found on email. I am on LinkedIn, but yeah, also don't check it as often as I should. So emails are preferred.
Great. So again, you three, thank you so much for taking the time and giving us an exciting overview at the current state of bio and clinical informatics. I'm seeing a finger.
Yeah, I actually see a question in the chat. I think that what are the constraints with regard to the computational capacities available at the moment? That was just sent. And yeah.
Oh yeah, maybe we can comment on that pretty quickly.
I think with computational capacity, I think that the cloud computing is really helping to give people access to the computational capacities required for these kinds of things. Because like for me at the university, I've had well, we have a computer cluster that we have access to, but that requires it's an expensive thing. It's you know, the university is quite a large institution. Smaller institutions might not have access to these big high performance computer clusters. So I think that definitely these like all various cloud computing services are very good to help people, well, kind of democratize this field.
Maybe I
think it is,
something.
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, so it's mainly important and crucial for data like video data, imaging data, and genomic data, where you really have large file sizes and you have to analyze a huge amount of data. There, I would also say that computer clusters and cloud computing are the solution for the future, and otherwise it's simply not doable on a small computer. I think a key word there is also parallelization and usage of GPUs, so that you really put all computational power into it, which you can, otherwise you wait for months to analyze this kind of data.
But I will say, like, we are lucky in Germany, like most of the universities has these centers, and we have quite good accessibility.
Well, that's great. So then, if there aren't any more questions, I hope I'm not overlooking some in the chat again. I would I would again thank all 3 participants for participating, and it was a pleasure talking to you. I learned a lot of things, and I'm a little bit more optimistic for the future on the molecular level, but also on the clinical level, that we will move in an area into a time where disease will more and more be a thing of the past. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. It was great hearing from your work, and looking forward to hear more in the future.
It was really nice to be here. Thank you very much. Thanks for organizing also.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So,
and now I will stop the recording.